When someone goes no contact with a narcissist, it may look like silence, but trust me, behind that silence, there is a storm going on in their mind. Narcissists don't handle loss of control well, they don't handle boundaries well, and they definitely don't handle being ignored. You may think you're simply creating space to heal, but the narcissist sees no contact as a threat, a challenge, and sometimes even an insult. What they want from you, what they secretly crave, doesn't disappear just because you stepped away. In fact, your silence activates their deepest insecurities and their strongest manipulations. Today, we're breaking down 5 key things a narcissist secretly wants from you when there's no contact. By understanding these hidden motives, you'll see their behavior more clearly, and you'll understand why staying no contact is one of the most powerful decisions you can ever make. When you go no contact with a narcissist, the very first thing they crave from you is your emotional reaction. They don't necessarily want your love, your support, or even your presence. They want your emotion. In their world, emotion equals relevance. Emotion proves that they still matter. And because narcissists often struggle with a shaky and fragile sense of self, they rely on external reactions to feel significant. What you feel becomes a mirror for their self-worth. Without that mirror, they feel like they're disappearing. They don't care whether the emotion you show is anger that burns, sadness that drains you, or confusion that leaves you pacing around your house. Any emotion is better than no emotion at all. For someone who thrives on validation, silence is the ultimate deprivation. It's the psychological equivalent of removing oxygen from a fire. It weakens their flame. That's why no contact becomes so powerful. It's not about punishing them, it's about protecting yourself. But to the narcissist, it feels like an attack because it strips away the emotional fuel that keeps their ego inflated. Think about how many times they pushed your buttons in the past. Maybe they would pick fights and then suddenly act distant. Maybe they'd give you the silent treatment and watch you fall apart trying to figure out what you did wrong. Maybe they'd provoke jealousy, then laugh when you reacted. Every one of those behaviors had a purpose. Your emotional response fed them. It gave them power. It reminded them that they had the ability to change your mood and interrupt your peace. They don't always do this consciously. Sometimes it's instinctive. Their internal wiring is shaped by insecurity, fear of abandonment, and a deep need to feel superior. The moment you react, they feel like they have a place in your emotional world, and that's all they need. In some twisted way, your distress reassures them that you're still bonded to them. This is why no contact is so unsettling to them. It removes the assurance, it breaks the cycle, it interrupts the pattern they've always relied on. Suddenly, they can't read you, they can't get a rise out of you, they can't tell whether they still have influence. To them, that's terrifying, not because they care about your well-being, but because they care about losing their hold over you. Think about it like this. Narcissists are emotional pickpockets. They look for opportunities to take whatever emotional energy you give off, whether it's joy, fear, anger, despair. They use it, consume it, and often throw it back in your face. But when you go no contact, it's like closing the vault. They can't break in anymore. They can't access what used to be so easy for them to take, and that's when they start to panic. Sometimes this panic shows up quietly, through subtle attempts to get your attention. They might accidentally like an old photo on your social media from years ago. They might create a fake account just to watch your stories. They might check in with mutual friends and casually drop your name in conversation, hoping the message somehow makes its way back to you. They may even post vague quotes or dramatic stories online that you know are meant for you. These small moves aren't random. They're emotional fishing lines. They're hoping you'll bite. Other times, the panic shows up in more obvious ways. They reach out with emotional bait, that message that says, "I hope you're okay," or "I just want to make sure you're safe," or "Can we talk? I feel like we ended on the wrong note." On the surface, these messages look empathetic, but underneath they carry a very different truth. I need to know you still care about me. I need to know you still feel something because your silence is making me feel irrelevant. And that's where the real life example comes in, a perfect illustration of how narcissists operate under the surface. The woman who blocked her narcissistic ex didn't do it to be dramatic. She did it to safeguard her mental peace, but for 2 weeks he was quiet. Then suddenly, he reached out with that carefully crafted message, "I hope you're okay, I'm worried about you." It had nothing to do with her well-being. It had everything to do with his own fear of becoming insignificant. He wasn't thinking, is she safe? Is she eating well? Is she healing? He was thinking, why isn't she reaching out? Why isn't she reacting? Why am I not getting anything from her? His concern was self-focused, not empathetic, and that's a critical thing to understand. Narcissists confuse your emotional reaction with their emotional survival. Your reaction enables the psychological loop they depend on. Your silence forces them to confront the emptiness they try so hard to fill. They'll do anything to avoid facing that emptiness. So they test your boundaries, poke at your emotions, and look for cracks in your no contact wall. If they can get even a small reaction, a sigh, a message, a moment of weakness, they interpret it as proof that they're still embedded in your emotional world. That moment for them is a win. It validates the idea that they still matter. But if you remain silent, you communicate something far more powerful than words ever could. You no longer control my emotions. Your silence becomes a statement of independence. It's you reclaiming your power piece by piece. It's you breaking the chain they once wrapped around your emotional self. It's you choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, healing over hurt. And that's why the narcissist wants your reaction so desperately. Your reaction keeps them alive in your story. Your silence writes them out of it. When you go no contact with a narcissist, something profound happens, something they didn't expect and definitely didn't prepare for. They lose control. And for a narcissist, losing control feels like losing oxygen. Control is the foundation of how they navigate relationships, how they protect their ego, and how they maintain the image they want the world to see. So when you cut off contact, you disrupt the system they've built. You take away the levers they pull to manage you, your emotions, your actions, your decisions, and sometimes even your sense of self. A narcissist doesn't see relationships as equal partnerships. They see them as systems of influence. They aren't thinking, how can we grow together? They think, how can I ensure this person supports the version of myself I want to believe in? And as long as they can control the narrative, who you think they are, who they want you to be, and how the relationship operates, they feel safe. Not emotionally safe, but ego safe. Their identity often feels like a structure built on sand, and control is the only thing that keeps it from collapsing. Once you step away and create silence, the dynamic they rely on falls apart. Suddenly, they can't gauge your mood. They can't predict your reactions. They can't sense whether you're vulnerable, confused, or still emotionally tied to them. They can't use charm, guilt, or manipulation to pull you back into the cycle. They can't remind you of old memories, twist your words, or reframe the past. The tools they've always used go dull the moment you go silent. This loss of control can send a narcissist into a kind of psychological tailspin. Not necessarily an outward meltdown. Sometimes it's subtle, calculated, and quiet. They may not scream or lash out directly. Instead, they scramble to restore control in more indirect, strategic ways. They might do things that seem harmless on the surface, but underneath, each move is an attempt to pull back the strings they once held. You might see them suddenly posting pictures online that look overly happy, overly successful, or overly confident. These posts aren't accidental. They're signals. They're calculated performances meant to make you question yourself. Are they really doing that well without me? Are they happier now? Did I make a mistake? Are they proving something to me? Even if you don't respond, they hope you're watching. They hope you're wondering. Because if you're wondering, they still have psychological space in your mind. And if that doesn't work, they may switch tactics. They might start asking about you through mutual friends, coworkers, or family members. The questions will feel innocent. Have you talked to them lately? I just want to make sure they're doing okay. But this isn't concern, it's surveillance. They're gathering data. They want to know if you seem sad, lost, angry, or nostalgic. They want updates on your emotional landscape because information equals control. There was a man who went no contact with his narcissistic mother after years of subtle emotional manipulation. Guilt trips, backhanded compliments, silent treatments, and constant criticism disguised as concern. After he cut ties, she didn't call him. She didn't text him. Instead, she called his sister, his aunt, even his old college friend, not to check on his well-being, but to shape the story. He's not doing well. I'm worried. Soon, he started getting calls from relatives he hadn't spoken to in years. Your mom says you're distant. Is everything okay? It wasn't love behind those words. It was control. She wanted to regain influence by controlling the narrative. If she couldn't reach him directly, she would reach him through the people around him. If she couldn't control his emotions, she would control how others perceived him. Narcissists fear losing their grip, so they tighten it wherever they still can. Another common way they try to regain control is by rewriting history. They may tell others there was no reason for them to go no contact, or they're being dramatic, or I tried everything. This is their way of regaining authority over the story. If they can't convince you, they'll convince everyone else. That way the world still sees them as the hero, the caring partner, the devoted friend, or the misunderstood parent. Sometimes, though, their attempts become more direct. They might send a message that lacks any emotional tone. You left your things here, or what's the password to the account? Practical on the surface, but deliberate underneath. These messages are hooks, they're doorway invitations. They want you to reply even if it's just one line. A single message is enough for them to believe, I still have access, I still have power. They may also send nostalgic reminders. Saw your favorite movie today and thought of you, or remember that trip we took? These aren't expressions of sentiment, they're psychological anchors. They're attempts to pull you back into the emotional ecosystem they've controlled for so long. No contact strips away their ability to influence your mind, your choices, and your reality. That's why they work so hard, sometimes desperately, to regain that influence. The loss of control forces them to confront the truth that they've always feared, that without your emotional energy, their power weakens. Without your presence, the dynamic they built falls apart. Without your reactions, they are left with only themselves, something they often spend their entire lives running from. And this is why your silence is so powerful. It disrupts their strategies, it dismantles their illusions, it forces them into a position they despise, being powerless in a situation they once believed they ruled. They don't want equality, they don't want mutual respect, they want control. When no contact takes that control away, it creates a void they can't tolerate. Their attempts to regain control aren't signs that they love you, miss you, or value you. They're signs that they're losing the grip they depend on. Losing control feels like losing identity, and that's a feeling they cannot stand. When you go no contact with a narcissist, something unsettling happens for them, not for you. They begin to feel a discomfort they can't name, a creeping tension they can't escape. And that tension revolves around one of their oldest, deepest strategies, keeping you in a state of self-doubt. Narcissists rely on confusion the way other people rely on communication. They rely on mixed messages, emotional highs and lows, and inconsistent moments of affection because these patterns create a fog. When you're inside that fog, you second-guess your instincts, and when you second-guess your instincts, you're easier to control. So when you suddenly remove yourself from the chaos, when you go quiet, grounded, and unreachable, that fog starts to lift for you. But for the narcissist, the fog becomes a warning. They sense that you might be gaining clarity, and clarity is their greatest enemy. Because once you see the pattern, once you recognize the manipulation, once you piece together the truth of what you lived through, you stop being susceptible to the doubts they planted in you. That's why, even in silence, they want you to question yourself. They want to know that somewhere in your mind, the seeds they planted are still growing. They want you to replay old arguments, wonder if you misinterpreted things, or ask yourself if you were too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding. They want you to feel torn between what you experienced and what they insisted was true. That internal conflict is one of their favorite forms of control because it keeps you emotionally tied to them without them having to lift a finger. They depend on your self-doubt because it creates a mental loop that can pull you back long after the relationship ends. Even when you're physically gone, they want you to emotionally stay. The bond they form isn't love. It's psychological confusion. It's the result of unpredictable cycles, moments of cruelty followed by moments of tenderness, moments of distance followed by sudden closeness, criticism followed by affection. This inconsistency wires your brain to crave their approval. And when you don't get it, you look inward and blame yourself. So when you go no contact, they want that pattern to continue in your mind. They want you to sit in your room at night asking yourself questions like, maybe it wasn't that bad, or maybe I overreacted, or maybe they did love me, because the moment you start rewriting the story to make it seem more gentle than it was, you become vulnerable again. This is why many people who leave narcissistic relationships still feel emotional pull months, sometimes years later. It's not because the relationship was healthy or deeply loving, it's because the confusion was deeply conditioning. Studies on trauma bonds show that intermittent reinforcement, the emotional whiplash of hot and cold behavior, creates some of the strongest psychological ties. You don't bond to the narcissist because they are stable. You bond to them because they're unpredictable. And your brain keeps searching for resolution. The narcissist knows, consciously or not, that doubt is their leverage, even when they pretend not to care, even when they act indifferent, even when they pretend they've moved on. They still hope you're replaying old moments and questioning your decisions. They hope their voice is still in your head when you lie down to sleep. They hope you hear their criticisms in your mind. They hope their disapproval still scares you a little. They hope their sudden kindness still confuses you. They hope their promises still tug at your heart. Because if you're doubting yourself, they still have a place in your emotional world. And as long as they occupy that space, they know there's a chance you might come back or at least remain emotionally stuck. This is why narcissists often reach out at the exact moment you're starting to feel stronger. It's not magic, it's timing. They sense the shift. They can feel when you start reclaiming your strength or when the fog starts to clear. And they react by doing something that destabilizes you again. Maybe they send a nostalgic message. Maybe they apologize in a vague way that sounds sincere but avoids accountability. Maybe they pretend they've changed. Maybe they act like they're the victim. It doesn't matter what the message is. The objective is the same: trigger doubt, make you question your decision, make you soften, make you reconsider. All they need is a small crack in your certainty. A single moment of emotional wobble is enough for them to slip back into your mind. There was a woman who stayed no contact for months. She journaled, went to therapy, and slowly rebuilt her confidence. Then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, she got a message: "I've been thinking about everything. I realize now that I made mistakes." She stared at the screen and instantly doubt crept in. Maybe he had changed. Maybe all the pain could be rewritten. Maybe they could start fresh. But when she didn't respond, the tone shifted. A day later, another message: "I guess you never really cared. I tried my best." And just like that, the manipulation revealed itself. It was never about self-awareness. It was about pulling her back into doubt. One moment with vulnerability, the next with guilt. This is the pattern. They push doubt into your mind because doubt fogs your clarity. And clarity is what frees you. The narcissist's fear isn't losing you as a person. They fear losing access to your self-doubt, because self-doubt is what keeps you emotionally invested. Once the doubt fades, so does their power over you. Once your mind calms, once the fog lifts, once you hear your own voice again, everything changes. You begin to recognize what was real and what was twisted. You begin to see their patterns as predictable, not powerful, you begin to understand that the confusion you felt wasn't your weakness, it was their strategy. And that realization is something they desperately don't want you to reach. Because once you trust your own perception, once you validate your own experiences, once you honor your own truth, their influence dissolves. You become unreachable, not because you block them, but because the internal grip they had on you has broken. When you stop doubting yourself, their entire system collapses. Even when a narcissist can't reach you directly, they want access. Not access in a loving, caring, or genuine sense, but access to your life, your energy, your information, and your emotions. When you go no contact, they suddenly realize that the influence they once had is slipping away. That feeling of losing touch with someone they considered theirs is unbearable for them. They are wired to need a connection where they hold the upper hand, and when that connection disappears, their mind begins to strategize. They look for cracks, channels, anything that can provide a glimpse into your world because being shut out is intolerable. This access isn't always overt. Sometimes it's subtle, almost invisible. They might reach out to your friends or family, pretending concern, casual curiosity, or just small talk. They might ask, "Have you talked to them recently?" Or "How are they doing?" These questions are not innocent. They are reconnaissance. They are attempts to gather information about your emotional state, your routines, your choices, and whether you are moving forward without them. Every bit of knowledge they acquire gives them a sense of security that they still have a presence in your life. Other times, their attempts are more visible and intrusive. They might check your social media with fake accounts or mutual connections. They might drop by places they know you frequent under the guise of coincidence. They may leave messages in indirect ways, tagging you in posts, commenting on photos of mutual friends, or sending messages to people close to you in hopes that the information trickles back. Every action is calculated to regain what they've lost, their access to your life, and through it, a sense of control. Think about the mental landscape of a narcissist when no contact begins. Suddenly, they cannot gauge your reaction, cannot see your routine, cannot influence your decisions, and cannot validate themselves through your attention. The uncertainty creates anxiety and a subtle panic that drives them to reclaim access. They want to know if you're healing, if you're dating someone new, if you're happy, if you're still thinking about them. Your absence is a threat to their ego, and the only way to feel stable again is to find a way to peek back into your world. There was a man who went no contact with his ex-girlfriend, who had been highly manipulative throughout their relationship. For months, she didn't contact him directly. But one day, he noticed comments on his friend's posts that seemed targeted, almost as if she was leaving breadcrumbs. She reached out to a mutual friend to ask subtle questions. How is he doing? Has he talked to anyone about me? It wasn't concern for him. It wasn't guilt or regret. It was a desperate attempt to regain a connection through indirect channels, to have some foothold back in his life. Narcissists also often test boundaries with indirect communication. A simple message on social media, a like on an old photo, a view on a story can serve as a probe. They're hoping you'll react, even minimally, because a single response confirms they still have access. The beauty of these tactics, from their perspective, is that they don't expose vulnerability or risk rejection. They can poke, probe, and observe from a distance, quietly regaining access without direct confrontation. Another common tactic is the creation of accidental encounters. They might appear where they know you'll be under the guise of coincidence, purely to test your reaction. Your presence gives them information. Are you tense, calm, guarded, indifferent? Every micro-expression, every word you say is valuable to them. They measure it, analyze it, and use it as data to determine how much influence they still have. Access isn't always about communication. It's about observation. Even holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries can become triggers. Narcissists often attempt to exploit these moments, knowing that certain dates carry emotional weight. They may send vague greetings or indirect messages through mutual friends, hoping that sentimentality will crack the armor of no contact. They want to see if these significant dates provoke a response, any sign that you still acknowledge them in your emotional world. This desire for access is rooted in fear. Fear that you are moving on without them. Fear that you are discovering your independence. Fear that you are reclaiming your life. They cannot tolerate the idea that you exist in freedom outside of their influence. Because in their minds, if you are free, it's a reflection of their inadequacy. The more independent and self-assured you become, the more they feel the loss of control, and the more they crave information about your life to compensate. A narcissist will sometimes disguise their reach as concern or care. They might ask, "I just want to make sure you're okay," or "I heard about something in your life. Are you handling it?" The words sound gentle, even kind, but the underlying motivation is surveillance. They are fishing for access to your state of mind. The message isn't about you, it's about them. They want confirmation that you are thinking of them, that your life is still intertwined with the past they controlled. The danger in these tactics is subtle but real. Even indirect access can erode your peace of mind if you allow it. Reading too much into the breadcrumbs, wondering about the motives of others, and replaying what they might be trying to find out can create mental loops that pull you back into their orbit. This is exactly what they want: to remain relevant, to maintain psychological presence, and to keep you entangled in thoughts about them, even when you're not responding. No contact isn't just about blocking messages or deleting numbers. It's about removing the mental channels through which a narcissist can maintain access. Every indirect attempt they make is a test, a probe, a measure of whether they still exist in your emotional and psychological world. And every time you maintain your silence, every time you refuse to engage, every time you do not react to their breadcrumbs, you deny them the access they crave. They want to know if you're sad, angry, nostalgic, or confused. They want to know if they still matter. They want to see the cracks in your resolve. But the truth is that you are no longer theirs to influence. Their attempts to reach you, even indirectly, are signals of their desperation and their dependence on your attention. And as long as you stay grounded, aware, and emotionally self-contained, every effort they make to access you fails. Access is the hidden currency of narcissists. They don't need your approval or your forgiveness. They don't need your presence. They need the psychological foothold that allows them to occupy your thoughts, shape your emotions, and maintain the sense that you are still theirs in some way. No contact cuts off that currency completely, and in doing so, it strips them of the invisible power they once held. Your freedom, your peace, and your life outside of their reach are the most effective responses to their attempts at access. Every probe they make, every indirect message, every mutual connection they contact is a reminder that they are no longer in control. And that reminder is not just powerful, it's liberating. The final thing a narcissist secretly wants when you go no contact is for you to break it first. This is perhaps the most important, most revealing desire because it shows exactly what their world revolves around: power, validation, and the illusion of control. A narcissist doesn't see your choice to step away as an act of self-care or strength. They see it as a challenge, a threat, and an affront to the story they've built about themselves. In their mind, you leaving is not just a boundary, it is a rebellion, a refusal to feed them in the way they expect, and that cannot stand. They live for the moment when you reach out first. That single act is proof that they are still important, still central, still able to pull you back into their orbit. It validates the core belief that underlies most narcissistic behavior, that they are irresistible, necessary, and impossible to escape. When you break no contact, they feel like they've won a silent war. You didn't do it because they were right or because the relationship is healthy. You did it because they can still manipulate the world in subtle ways. That is the ultimate prize for them. Even small gestures count. A simple text like, "I hope you're okay," or "Can we talk?" is enough to satisfy their craving for validation. It doesn't need to be a long conversation or an admission of feelings. It doesn't need to be a reconciliation. All that matters is that you, who had taken your power back, have made a move that signals you are still connected to them emotionally. And in that moment, their fragile sense of self feels bolstered, as if the universe has confirmed that they are still central in your life. The way they push this desire often looks subtle at first. They might send a casual message that seems harmless, like a memory from years ago or a vague comment on social media. The message is carefully crafted to appear innocent, even coincidental, but beneath it is a test. Will you respond? Will your silence crack? Will you let your curiosity, your empathy, your loneliness, or even your unresolved hope override your boundaries? If you answer, no matter how small, they have succeeded in drawing you back into their gravitational pull. There are countless stories of people who successfully maintained no contact for weeks, months, even years, only to receive a single, perfectly timed message that shakes them. "I've been thinking about everything," one person recalls receiving from an ex who had been entirely absent for months. The words sounded reflective, even remorseful, but the subtext was clear. "I want you to reach out first. I want to see if you still care. I want to confirm that I still have a place in your mind." Narcissists are masters of timing. They don't just pick a random moment to try to break you, they pick the moment when your emotional defenses are likely to waver. Perhaps it's a time when you are tired, stressed, or feeling vulnerable. Perhaps it's a moment of nostalgia when memories of the past feel tender. They know exactly when you are most likely to give them what they want. This is why no contact requires not just physical and digital boundaries, but emotional vigilance. Every lapse, every small response, every moment of curiosity is a doorway back into their sphere of influence. The need for you to break no contact also reveals something essential about their psychology. Narcissists do not internalize self-worth. They cannot generate a stable sense of value from within. They rely on external proof, and nothing provides that proof better than seeing you reach out. When you send that first message, they hear it as an announcement to the world: "I still matter. I am still wanted. I am still powerful." This is the silent, invisible victory that fuels their sense of superiority. What is important to understand is that this desire has nothing to do with genuine care, affection, or love. Narcissists do not crave reconciliation because they miss you as a person. They crave the illusion of influence because that illusion reinforces their identity. When you stay no contact, you remove that illusion. When you refuse to give them the satisfaction of seeing you respond first, you dismantle the system they've relied on to maintain their self-esteem and perceived importance. There is a real emotional cost to this. Many people who have been in narcissistic relationships feel conflicted when they receive a message. They may remember good times, they may feel compassion, or they may fear hurting the other person. The internal struggle is exactly what the narcissist is counting on. They hope your empathy will override your reason. They hope your habit of seeking harmony or closure will make you break your own boundaries. Every moment of doubt is an opportunity for them to reclaim influence. And yet, this is where your strength matters most. By maintaining your silence, you assert control over your life in a way they cannot touch. You demonstrate that your peace, your clarity, and your self-respect are more important than their need for validation. Their desire for you to reach out first is, at its core, a reflection of their fear of losing power. They fear that without your response, their influence ends and the truth of their limitations becomes undeniable, not just to you, but to themselves. It is crucial to see the patterns when they send that message or make that subtle attempt to provoke a response. It is not about love. It is not about reconciliation. It is about proving that they can still matter in your emotional world. It is about confirming that their sense of self, which depends on your reactions, is intact. And every time you resist, every time you choose yourself over the illusion of connection, you weaken the hold they have over you. Narcissists will continue to hope, strategize, and probe, but each of these attempts is a reflection of their desperation. They want you to break no contact first because they need to see evidence that you are still within their sphere of influence. If you remain steadfast, they face the stark reality that the narrative they built, the one in which they were central and you were dependent, is no longer true. Your independence, your clarity, and your boundaries are powerful tools. They strip away the secret power the narcissist seeks and leave them confronting a truth they cannot change. They are no longer in control of your emotional life. Every attempt they make to pull you back is a window into what they cannot tolerate, that you can live fully, freely, and independently without their influence. Their desire to see you break first is a reflection of the one thing they fear above all, that your life, your happiness, and your boundaries will exist on your terms alone. Here's the truth. A narcissist doesn't want connection. They want control. They want emotional fuel, attention, validation, access, and power. No contact takes away all of that. But here's what you get: peace, clarity, safety, self-respect, freedom, and a chance to rebuild your life on your own terms. They want your reaction. They want your doubt. They want your presence. They want your access. They want you to break the silence. But what you need, what you deserve, is your healing. Stick with no contact, not because it punishes them, but because it protects you.